Well, there's no turning back now for Giants head coach Brian Daboll and general manager Joe Schoen. Now that they have pushed their proverbial chips to the center of the table by naming Jaxson Dart as their starting quarterback, their 2025 first round, 25th overall pick. No less, with the 3-0 Chargers on deck, who are going to bring their 8th ranked total defense to MetLife Stadium on Sunday. And here's my thing. Ever since the decision was made to select Dart under such high pressure circumstances, including with this context, the team finishing 3-14 last season, and owner John Mara saying at the end of the year that his patience was running out and that he better be in a better mood by this point next year. And also considering that they made that decision 10 toes down with all of the initial talk that was surrounding Shedeur Sanders. Yes, before Adam Schefter tweeted April 1st that it was, quote, increasingly unlikely that Shedeur Sanders was going to be drafted with the number 2 and the number 3 picks. Right? Because in my opinion, that's when the initial narrative on what was expected of where Shedeur was going to go changed after that, in my opinion. So having done that, this is obviously what Daboll wanted. And actually, you know what? I'm not mad at that. I actually get that. Because if it's going to be your last stand and potentially your last chance, do it with your guy. You should do it with your guy. I get wanting to do it with your guy. But here's my question. What did you all have to do to get to this point? And are there any potential negative residual energies from that still hovering around the organization? Let's look at 5 things. Number 1, let's start with Russell Wilson, since he's right now in the vortex with this decision that was just today, dethroning him as starting quarterback. And my question is, am I fully convinced that even Russell Wilson got a fair shot with 3 games to acclimate into the season under a new regime with a new offense? When you're looking at the first 2 games of the season, didn't have his starting left tackle in Andrew Thomas. And in one of those 2 games, that being the Cowboys game at Arlington, he's 1 interception away from maybe that game going in a completely different direction after throwing for his second career best 450 passing yards and having the most deep passing yardage by any quarterback going back to 2015 and Ben Roethlisberger with 260 deep passing yards, something he just recently accomplished just practically a week ago. And then not to mention in this last recent game I was at, Sunday Night Football, Chiefs at Giants, where Russell Wilson faced 55.3% of pressure on his dropbacks, which was the 3rd highest such rate in week 3. So I'm just saying, what is the evaluation from that sample size in those conditions? I'm just saying. Which brings me to point number 2. What was the point of signing Russell Wilson if you always were going to go down swinging with Dart anyways, right? And I'm saying this in the context of having Jameis Winston and signing him to a 2-year contract worth $8 million at $4 million a year, and then giving Russell Wilson $10.5 million for a 1-year deal. Now, looking back at that, if you're not going to Russell Wilson, we're waiting for Brian Daboll, whether he's going to name him number 2 or the number 3 quarterback when he speaks on Wednesday, right? But that potentially is an extra $10.5 million that could be used elsewhere, right? And this is why I was talking about it potentially being a panic move, but this is where you were going to end up anyways. And let me tell you, I'll be the first to admit I'm also conflicted about Russell Wilson because, number 1, on one hand, you do have to look at the histories of what happened in Denver with Sean Payton and what happened with him not being in Pittsburgh. And I've wrote about this. I've already said this, that sources were saying coming out of the Pittsburgh situation, even before the season ended or right around that time, that this is where Mike Tomlin was headed, at least according to the people that I talked to, and where he was dealing with his evaluation with Russell in the intermediate game, some other aspects of his game, thus him not being there. But number two, though, on the other hand, I do feel once you sign him and you make that choice, he does deserve a fair shot, because it's not as if you didn't know that he was 36 years old. It's not as if you didn't know that he has received the most sacks of any quarterback in the last 13 years at 560. And those things bring wear and tear that then beget another question. If you know this has affected his scrambling game, his rollout game, at least when you look at it over a larger sample size, not just in one game where his career's on the line in Dallas and things like that, but over a larger sample size, you're going to see that wear and tear. So that may call for modification in play calling as well, because I know a lot of people are talking about the last two series that the Giants had in the game against the Chiefs and what happened in the red zone and incompletions going out in the back of the end zone. But when you look at the tape, there are some of those plays where the run and the pass were covered, just to be, objective. And honestly speaking, when Brian Daboll, whoever brass is looking at this, you have to ask how much of the evaluation is being because of preservation mode, because the time is running out. So these are the energies that I'm talking about that you're evaluating when you're looking at residual energies and treatment and what have you, because I don't care how philanthropic Russell Wilson has been in his career, or how many babies he's kissed, or how many hospitals he's visited. At the end of the day, he's a person, he's a man, he has the ego just like most people would. And it's very hard, in my opinion, it's a little bit unsettling, even if it's 0.008%, when bringing in Dart, you're coming in and out. It's like either go with one or the other. I'm not saying he's a Brian Daboll head coach to do that. What I'm saying is it can be unsettling, and that has an effect. And it does go to the question of, how fair is the sample size? How fair is the evaluation? I'm just saying, in this topic of residual energies, which brings me on to number 3, Jameis Winston. Maybe doesn't want me to have this conversation, but it, to me, is still a fair thing. It doesn't matter if Jameis Winston is comfortable with his role and being a veteran leader. And these are things that he said to me, that he feels like it's his calling, his religious calling, and he's okay with that. At the end of the day, in my opinion, you're still supposed to have a legitimate competition in sports. I think every player would appreciate that. And when you go back to March and the owners' meetings at West Palm Beach and some of the things that were, said down there, and some of the things that were said in April, it is clear that this competition was predetermined. And I do think it's legitimate to ask, was there discomfort with potentially having Jameis as starter? When you talk about him being the figurehead of an organization as quarterback, or his face on the front of press kit materials or season ticket holder materials, just, based off of his energy, or how, sometimes we see him as when he's, in full Jameis Winston regalia. But when you look at the results in being 3-17, going back to last season, what are those potential concerns netting you? Which brings me to point number 4, and there being a need to also reflect on how other people and how other situations have been handled. You tell me what comes to mind when I name just some of these names without going deep under the surface. Number 1, Daniel Jones. Number 2, Saquon Barkley. Number 3, Odell Beckham Jr. Number 4, Tom Coughlin. Number 5, Wink Martindale. Number 6, and I'm just going to add this because, yes, I know he's not a Giant, but I do think it's relevant, Shedeur Sanders. Just think back to some of the things that got leaked out of that building during the pre-draft process that also had their effect on Shedeur. Not saying that all of it is on the Giants, and not saying that they're the only team to pass on Shedeur. Saying obviously that Shedeur doesn't have some accountability himself, meaning that if he had to do it all over again, there's obviously some things that he probably would change in his process if he had to do it all over again. That's most people. So we're not taking that away. However, I am mentioning that because things did get leaked from the Giants building that we know are from the Giants building, and some of the other things that got said. Not saying that they're the only things leaked from the Giants building, but we don't necessarily know for sure where those things came from, or they weren't attributed to them as a matter of the record, right? So I'm just saying that these are things to think about. And that's not even emptying the full jar of names that we could go through when you start going through the regime, the coaching staffs, and the player rosters. Okay, that's just naming a few. When it comes to things that have occurred that have impacted people's lives and impacted, the energies that always have a rebound date, slow or fast, which brings me to point number 5. How many others have been affected? These are just questions to ask when you're having these reflections, given the time, given the record, given the situation. Other evaluations to reflect on, going back to the 2015 season when you're just looking at the coaching roster, going back from Tom Coughlin, Ben McAdoo, Steve Spagnuolo as interim, Pat Shurmur, Joe Judge, and Brian Daboll now in his 4th season. And that's not to say that nothing good has happened. Obviously, we know that Brian Daboll was coach of the year in his first year. The organization has had 2 playoff entries going back to 2015 with the wild card and a divisional appearance. So we're not saying that all has been bad in that time period. And all I'm saying is that we're having this conversation given where we are now in the record. Only God knows how things are going to unfold masterfully with his plan and according to his will, and how he's going to equalize some of these minute details that we're reflecting on, that we're talking about right now. But what I do know is that if after week 4 against the Chargers, if in this scenario that the Giants fall to 0-4, and then if even after that, when the Giants travel week 5 and go to New Orleans to a team that's 0-3 now, if they fall to 0-5 in that scenario, that owner John Mara is going to have a lot to think about at his desk and on his table. And potentially even more so if for some reason the team does go to Jameis Winston at that point. After all that, now that said, I want to end on this. There are a lot of good, smart, and well-intentioned people in the Giants building, okay? There's just a lot of pressure right now. And even when it comes to Jaxson Dart, there's a lot to look forward to, and I get it. I've even seen, the performances in the preseason, the 3 touchdowns against the no interception, the moxie, the potential, the talent, all of that. And not only that, but from what I've heard, how people say, he's very deferential and, humble and respectful of the veteran quarterbacks in the quarterback room. And not only that, from just what I seen, the energy that he exuded when I was in the locker room after the game, and just how I feel like how he was taking things in when obviously adversity is hovering over the locker room. That being said, he's had a lot of favorable and advantageous conditions surrounding his point up till now. And not that we should be mad at that. He should take full advantage of that. But yes, Brian Daboll is obviously invested in Jaxson Dart doing well as many people in that building too. All I'm saying is this is a good time to reflect on how and why the Giants got here, being 3-17 up just until last season. Is there a reason to clear any conscience or collective conscience looking back at things in the past up to this point? And are there some things to do that are better moving forward in terms of how you handle things and potentially impact people when under pressure? This is not a referendum. It's just an illumination and food for thought. I'm Josina Anderson, Senior NFL Insider on the Exhibit News Network.